of the book, Shin Fu. Let's get the candles lit and let's go back in time and let's enjoy this wonderful session. And if you're wondering, I have a little water in the jug, so you don't have to worry about Smokey the Bear. So we got our hot tea, and let me just slide it right there. We have our book, Shin Fu. I spelled it wrong, but that's what it is. So let's jump right in. Oh, how you like that? Ooh. They're like little gremlins. They didn't spill quite a few. So I want to say thank you for joining, and thanks for supporting these live literary reads, if that's the right way of saying it. Get a little bit of this hot tea, just a coat. How you like that? All right, let's jump right in. So we're going to pick off in chapter 1 where we left off. So the title of chapter 1 was, the title of the book is 6 Records of a Floating Life. And the title of chapter 1 is The Joys of the Wedding Chamber. I am afraid your parents will disapprove, Yoon said. I told her I would ask their permission myself. And the next day, I went to look over the house. It had only 2 rooms, one in front and one in the back, each divided by a partition. The windows were paper and a bed of bamboo, and the place had altogether a subtle charm about it. When the old woman heard what we wanted, she was very happy to rent the bedroom to us. I pasted white paper up on the walls, and soon it looked like a different place entirely. I then respectfully informed my mother and took Yoon to live there. Our only neighbors were an old couple who raised vegetables for a living. Learning we had come to escape the summer's heat, they came to call on us, bringing gifts of fish from the pond and vegetables from the garden. I tried to pay for them, but they would not take anything. So Yoon made them some shoes, which we finally prevailed on them to accept. It was then the beginning of the 7th month, with dark shadows among the green trees. There was a breeze across the water, and the songs of cicadas were everywhere. The old couple also made us a fishing pole, and I took Yoon fishing in the deep shadows of the willow trees. When the sun was going down, we would climb to the top of the small hill and admire the twilight. We used to make up impromptu poems there, one line of which was, "Beasts like clouds eat the setting sun. The bow-like moon shoots falling stars." After a while, when the moonlight fell directly into the pond and the sound of insects came from all around, we would move the bed out beside the fence. The old woman would come to tell us when the wine was warm and the food was hot. We would drink in the moonlight until we were a little tipsy and then eat. After having a wash, we would fan ourselves with banana leaves and sit or lie down and listen to our old neighbors telling stories of sin and retribution. At 3 strokes of the night watch, we would go in to sleep feeling cool and refreshed. It was almost like not living in the city at all. We had asked the old couple to buy chrysanthemums and plant them all the way around the fence. And when the flowers bloomed in the 9th month, I decided to stay there with Yoon for 10 more days. About then, my mother came to visit us and seemed quite happy with what she saw. We ate crabs beside the flowers and thoroughly enjoyed the day. One day, we should build a cottage here and buy hectare mu of land to make a garden around it, said Jung happily. We could have servants plant melons and vegetables that would be enough to live on. What, with your painting and my embroidery, it would give us enough to have a little to drink. While we wrote poetry, we could live quite happily ever after, wearing cotton clothes and eating nothing but vegetables and rice. We would never have to leave here. I deeply wished we could do so. The cottage is still there, but now I have lost my most intimate friend. It is enough to make one sigh deeply. About half a li from my house, on Vinegar Warehouse Lane, was the Tung Ting Temple, which we usually called the Narcissus Temple. Inside there were winding covered paths and a small park with pavilions. Each year on the god's birthday, the members of each family association would gather in their corner of the temple, hang up a special glass lantern, and erect a throne before it. Besides the throne, they would set out vases filled with flowers in a competition to see whose decorations were most beautiful. During the day, operas were performed, and at night candles of different lengths were set out among the vases and the flowers. This was called the lighting of the flowers. The colors of the flowers, the shadows of the lamps, and the fragrant smoke floating up from the incense urns made it all seem like a night banquet at the palace of the Dragon King himself. The heads of the family associations would play the flute and sing, or brew fine tea and chat with one another. Townspeople gathered like ants to watch this spectacle, and a fence had to be put up under the eaves of the temple to keep them out. One year, some friends of mine invited me to go and help to arrange their flowers, so I had the chance to see the festival myself. I went home and told Yoon how beautiful it was. What a shame that I cannot go just because I am not a man, said Yoon. If you wore one of my hats and some of my clothes, you could look like a man. Yoon thereupon braided her hair into a plait and made up her eyebrows. She put on my hat, and though her hair showed a little around the ears, it was easy to conceal. When she put on my robe, we found it was 1.5 inches too long, but she took it up around the waist and put on a riding jacket over it. What about my feet? Yoon asked. In the street they sell butterfly shoes, I said, in all sizes. They're easy to buy, and afterward you can wear them around the house. Wouldn't they do? Yoon was delighted, and when she had put on my clothes after dinner, she practiced for a long time putting her hands into her sleeves and taking large steps like a man. But suddenly she changed her mind. I am not going. It would be awful if someone found out. If your parents knew, they would never allow us to go. I still encouraged her to go. However, everyone at the temple knows me. Even if they find out, they will only take it as a joke. Mother is at Ninth's sister's house, so if we come and go secretly, no one will ever know. Yoon looked at herself in the mirror and laughed endlessly. I pulled her along and we left quietly. We walked all around inside the temple with no one realizing she was a woman. If someone asked who she was, I would tell them she was my cousin. They would only fold their hands and bow to her. At the last place we came to, young women and girls were sitting behind the throne that had been erected there. They were the family of Mr. Yang, one of the organizers of the festival. Without thinking, Yoon walked over there and began to chat with them, as a woman quite naturally might. And as she bent over to do so, she inadvertently laid her hand on the shoulder of one of the young ladies. One of the maids angrily jumped up and shouted, "What kind of rogue are you to behave like that?" I went over to try to explain, but Yoon, seeing how embarrassed the situation could become, quickly took off her hat and kicked up her foot, saying, "See, I am a woman too." At first, they all stared at Yoon in surprise, but then their anger returned to laughter. We stayed to have some tea and refreshments with them, and then called sedan chairs and went home. When Shin Fu of Wuchang County fell ill and died. My father wrote and ordered me to represent him at the funeral. Hearing this, Yun took me aside. If you are going to Wu Chang, you have to cross Lake Tai. I would love to go with you and see something more of the world. I had just been thinking how lonely it would be going by myself. I said that if you go with me, it would be lovely. But there was no excuse for you to go. I could say I wanted to go home for a visit. You could go to the boat first, and I would meet you there. Then on the way back, we could stop the boat under 10,000-year bridge, I said. We could relax in the moonlight, the way we used to at the pavilion of the waves. It was then the 18th day of the 6th month. In the cool of the morning, I took a servant and went ahead to Sioux River Dock, where we boarded a boat and waited. Yoon arrived in a sedan chair shortly afterwards. The boat cast off and left the Tiger's Roar Bridge, and after a while we began to see others sail in the wind, and birds on the sandy shore. The sky and the water became the same color. Is this the Lake Tai that everyone speaks of? Asked Yoon. Now that I see how grand the world is, I have not lived in vain. There are women who have lived their entire lives without seeing a vista like this. It seemed we had only chatted for a little while before we arrived at Wu Chang, where the wind was rustling the willows along the bank. I went ashore only to return after the funeral to find the boat empty. I anxiously questioned the boatman, who pointed along the bank and said, "Don't you see them in the shadow of the willows by the bridge watching the cormorants catch fish?" To my surprise, Yoon had gone ashore with the boatman's daughter. When I came up behind her, she was still covered with perspiration, leaning against the other girl and lost in watching the birds. I patted her shoulder and said, "Your clothes are soaked thorough." Yoon turned her head to look at me. "I was afraid someone from the Chin family would come to the boat without you," she said. "So I came here for a while to keep them from seeing me if they did." "Why did you come back so quickly?" I laughed. "So I could recapture you." We walked to the boat hand in hand and sailed back to 10,000 Years Bridge. The sun had not yet set by the time we reached the bridge, so we let down the windows of the boat to admit a breeze, then changed into silk clothes and fanning ourselves ate some melon to cool off. Before long, the setting sun turned the bridge red, and the twilight mist enveloped the willows in darkness. The silver moon was just rising, and the river quickly filled up with the lights of night fishermen. We sent our servants to the stern to drink with the boatmen. The boatman's daughter was named Su-Yun, and she had had several cups of wine with me once before. She was quite nice, so I called her over and asked her to sit with Yun. There was no light in the bow of the boat, so we were able to enjoy the moon and drink happily. We began to play a literary drinking game, at which Su-Yun could only blink her eyes. She listened to us for quite a while, then said, "I know a lot about drinking games, but I have never heard of this one. Will you teach it to me?" Yoon thought up several examples to try to explain it to her, but after some time the boat girl still did not understand. I laughed and said, "Stop it, lady teacher. I have a comparison that will explain the problem." "What kind of an example are you going to give?" Yoon asked. "A crane can dance, but cannot plow, while an axe can plow, but cannot dance. That is just the nature of things. Wouldn't it be a waste of time if you tried to teach each of them to play the other's game?" Su-Yun laughed playfully, hit me on the shoulder, and said, "Are you making fun of me?" At this, Yoon ordered us to stop. "From now on, we allow only talking, no more hitting. Whoever breaks this rule has to drink a big cup of wine." Su-Yun had quite a capacity for wine, so she poured a big cup and downed it at one gulp. "No hitting," I then said, "but surely it's all right if we caress one another. Yoon laughed and pushed Soo-yoon over to me. Caress her to your heart's content, then. Don't misunderstand me, I said, laughing. The whole point of caressing someone is to carry it off nonchalantly. Only a country boy would be rough about it. By this time, the scent of jasmine in their hair had mixed with the aroma of the wine, all of it overlaid by the smell of perspiration in their makeup. It was quite overpowering. The stink of cormorants filled the bow of this boat. I joked. It's enough to make a man sick. At this, Soo-yoon could not be stopped from hitting me repeatedly. Who told you to sniff around? She shouted. You broke the rule. Yoon called out to her. I sentenced you to 2 big cups. But he called me a commoner. Why shouldn't I hit him? He had a reason for using the word commoner. Yoon told her, drink these and I'll tell you. So Soo-yoon drank the 2 big cups of wine, one after the other, and Yoon told her how we had joked about the jasmine one night when we lived at the pavilion of the waves. If that's what he was talking about, Soo-yoon said, I should not have blamed him. The sentence should be carried out once again. She then drank a 3rd big cup of wine. I have heard what a beautiful voice you have, Yoon said, as she put the cup down. Could I hear one of your songs? Soo-young immediately began to sing, beating time on a small plate with her ivory chopsticks. Yoon was having so much fun she forgot how much she was drinking. She became tipsy without even realizing it, so that she laid to take a sedan chair and go home ahead of me. I stayed a few moments longer for some tea and conversation with Soo-young, and then walked home in the moonlight. At the time, we were living with my friend, Lu Pan Fang, at his home, the Villa of Serenity. A few days later, after our trip, Miss Lu heard some gossip and took Yoon aside. Yesterday, I heard that your husband had been seen drinking with 2 courtesans in a boat by the 10,000 Years Bridge. Did you know that? It happened all night, Yoon replied. But one of those courtesans was me, because she had brought it up. Yoon then told her in detail about our trip together. Hearing the explanation, Miss Lu laughed heartily and dropped the subject. In the 7th month of the Qian year of the reign of the Emperor Qin Lung, I returned from Yu Tung with my friend Su He Su Fing, who is my cousin's husband. He brought a new concubine back with him, raving about her beauty to everyone. And one day he invited Yoon to go in to see her. Afterwards, Yoon said to Sung Fing, she certainly is beautiful, but she is not the least bit charming. If your husband were to take a concubine, Su Fing asked, would she have to be charming as well as beautiful? Naturally, said Yoon. From then on, Yoon was obsessed with the idea of finding me a concubine, even though we had nowhere near enough money for such an ambition. There was a courtesan from Chekang named Wen Ling Sang, then living in Sochow. She was something of a poet and had written 4 stanzas of the theme of willow catkins that had taken the city by storm, many talented writers composing couplets in response to her originals. My friend Wei Chang Sing had long admired Ling Sang and asked us to help him write some verses to accompany hers. Yoon thought little of her and so declined, but I longed to write and thus composed some verses to her rhyme. One couplet that Yoon liked very much was, they arouse my springtime wistfulness and ensnare her wandering fancy. A year later, on the 5th day of the 8th month, Mother was planning to take Yoon on a visit to Tiger Hill. When my friend Sang Han suddenly arrived at our house, I am going to Tiger Hill too, he said, and today came especially to invite you to go with me and admire some flowers along the way. I then asked Mother to go on ahead and said I would meet her at Pantang near Tiger Hill. Sang Han took me to Lang He Sang, home where I discovered that she was already middle aged. However, she had a daughter named Han Yan, who thought, who though not yet fully mature, was as beautiful as a piece of jade. Her eyes were as lovely as the surface of an autumn pond, and while they entertained us, it became obvious that her literary knowledge was extensive. She had a younger sister named Wen Yun, who was still quite small. At first, I had no wild idea and wanted only to have a cup of wine and chat with them. I well knew that a poet, a poor scholar like myself, could not afford this sort of thing. And once inside, I began to feel quite nervous. While I did not show my unease in my conversation, I did quietly say to Sinhan, I'm only a poor fellow. How can you invite these girls to entertain me? Sanhan laughed. It's not that way at all. A friend of mine had invited me to come and be entertained by Han Yun today, but then he was called away by an important visitor. He asked me to be the host and invite someone else. Don't worry about it. At that, I began to relax. Later, when our boat reached Pantang, I told Han Yun to go aboard my mother's boat and pay her respects. That was when Yun met Han Yuan, and as happy as old friends at a reunion, they soon set off hand in hand to climb the hill in search of all the scenic spots it offered. Yun especially liked the height and vista of Thousand Clouds, and they sat there enjoying the view for some time. When we returned to Yefengping, we moored the boats side by side and drank long and happily. As the boats were being unmoored, Yun asked me if Hanwan could return aboard hers. While I went back to with Sinhan, to this I agreed. When we returned to Tuting Bridge, we went back aboard our own boats and took leave of one another. By the time we arrived home, it was already the third night watch. Today I have met someone who is both beautiful and charming, said Yun. I have just invited Han Yun to come and see me tomorrow, so I can try to arrange things for you. But we're not a rich family, I said, worried. We cannot afford to keep someone like that. How could people as poor as ourselves dare think of such a thing? And we are so happily married. Why should we look for someone else? But I love her too, Yun said, laughing. You just let me take care of everything. The next day at noon, Han Yun actually came. Yun entered her warmly, and during the meal we played a game. The winner would read a poem, while the loser had to drink a cup of wine. By the end of the meal, still not a word had been said about our obtaining Han Yuan. As soon as she left, Yun said to me, I have just made a secret agreement with her. She will come here on the 18th, and we will pledge ourselves as sisters. You will have to prepare animals for the sacrifice. Then, laughing and pointing to the jade bracelet on her arm, she said, if you see this bracelet on Han Yuan's arm, then it will mean she has agreed to our proposal. I have just told her my idea, but I am still not very sure what she thinks about it at all. I only listened to what she said, making no reply. It rained very hard on the 18th, but Han Yuan came all the same. She and Yun went into another room and were alone there for some time. They were holding hands when they emerged, and Han Yun looked at me shyly. She was wearing the jade bracelet. We had intended, after the incense was burned and they had become sisters, that we should carry on drinking. As it turned out, however, Han Yun had promised to go on a trip to Stone Lake, so she left as soon as the ceremony was over. She has agreed, Yun told me happily. Now how will you reward your go-between? I asked her the details on the arrangement. Just now spoke to her privately because I was afraid she might have another attachment. When she said she did not, I asked her, do you know why we have invited you here today, little sister? The respect of an honorable lady like yourself makes me feel like a small weed leaning up against a great tree, she replied. But my mother has high hopes for me, and I'm afraid I cannot agree without consulting her. I do hope, though, that you and I can think of a way to work things out. When I took off the bracelet and put it on her arm, I said to her, the jade of this bracelet is hard and represents the constancy of our pledge. And like our pledge, the circle of the bracelet has no end. Wear it as the first token of our understanding. To which she replied, the power to unite us rests entirely with you. So it seems as if we already won over Han Yuan. The difficult part will be convincing her mother, but I will think of a plan for that. I laughed and asked her, are you trying to imitate Li Wing, pitying the fragrant companion? Yes, she replied. From that time on, there was not a day that Yun did not talk about Hanwan. But later, Hanwan was taken off by a powerful man, and all of the plans came to nothing. In fact, it was because of this that Yun died. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is titled The Pleasures of Leisure. Pardon me while I take a sip. When I was small, I could stare directly at the sun with my eyes wide open. I could see the smallest things clearly and often took about almost mystic pleasure in making out the patterns of them. During the summer, whenever I heard the sound of mosquitoes swarming, I would pretend they were a flock of cranes dancing across the open sky. And in my imagination, they actually would become hundreds of cranes. I would look at them so long my neck became stiff. At night, I would let mosquitoes inside my mosquito net blow smoke at them and imagine that what I saw were white cranes soaring through blue clouds. It really did look like cranes flying among the clouds, and it was a sight that delighted me. I would often squat down by unkempt grassy places and flower beds, or by niches in walls, low enough so that my head was level with them, and concentrate so carefully that to me the grass became a forest, and the insects became animals, imagining that small mounds of earth were hills, and that shallow holes were valleys. I let my spirit wander there in happiness and contentment. Once, while I was concentrating all my attention on two insects battling in the grass, a giant suddenly appeared, knocking down the mountains and pulling up the trees. It was nothing but a toad, but with one flick of his tongue, he swallowed both insects. I was small, and because I had been so caught up in the scene, I could not help being frightened. When I had calmed down, I caught the toad, spanked it severely, and expelled it to the neighbor's yard. Since growing up, I have sometimes thought that the battle of the two insects was probably an attempted essay. The ancients said, essays deserveth death. I wonder why the insects were eaten by the toad. One day while I was absorbed in my imaginary world, my egg was bitten by an earthworm. In Sochow, we call the male organisms eggs, so that I swelled up and I could not urinate. The servants caught a duck and were forcing it to open its mouth over the wound, when suddenly one of them let go of the bird. The duck stretched out its neck as if to bite me there, and I screamed with fright. This became a family joke. These were all things that happened to me when I was small. When I was old, I became obsessed with a love of flowers and found much delight in pruning miniature potted trees to make them look like real ones. It was not until I met Chang Lan Po, however, that I began really to learn how to prune branches and care for sprouts and later to understand grafting and the creation of miniature rock formations in the pots. My favorite flower was the orchid because of its elegant fragrance and charming appearance, though it is difficult to obtain ones that can be considered truly classic. Shortly before Lanpo died, he presented me with a pot of orchids that looked like lotus flowers. The centers were white and broad, and the edges of the petals were straight. They had thin stems, and petals themselves were quite pale. This was a classic flower, and I treasured mine like a piece of old jade. When I was away from home, Yoon would water it herself, and its flowers and leaves grew luxuriantly. After I had had it for almost 2 years, however, it suddenly dried up and died. I dug it up and found the roots in good condition, white as jade, with many new shoots. At first I could not understand it, and could only sigh at the thought that I was simply not lucky enough to raise so fine a flower. Only later did I learn that someone who had asked for a cutting and been refused had poured boiling water over it and killed it. I swore that from that time on I would never grow orchids again. My next favorite flower was the azalea. Although it has no fragrance to speak of, its colors are long-lasting and it is easy to prune. But because Yoon loved their branches and leaves, she could not stand seeing me prune them too much. So it was difficult to raise them properly. It was the same with all my other plants. Every year, chrysanthemums would grow, east of the fence, blooming in the autumn. I preferred to pick them and put them in vases rather than to raise them in pots. It was not that I did not enjoy looking at them in pots, but because our house had no garden, I could not grow them in pots myself. And had I brought them in the market and transplanted them, they would have looked all jumbled and wrong. I did not want that. When putting chrysanthemums in a vase, one should select an odd number of flowers, not an even number. Each vase should contain flowers of only a single color. The mouths of the vases should be wide so that the flowers can spread out naturally. Whether one is displaying 5 or 7 flowers, or 30 or 40 flowers, they should rise straight from the mouth of the vase in one mass, neither crowded together nor falling around loosely and leaning against the mouth of the vase. This technique is called rising tightly. Some of the flowers should stand up gracefully, while others spread out at angles. Some should be high and some low, with a few buds in between to keep the arrangements from looking stiff and unnatural. The leaves should not be disorderly, and the stems should not be stiff. If one uses pins to hold flowers in positions, they should be hidden, the long pins cut off so that none protrude from the stems. This technique is called clearing the mouth of the vase. From 3 to 7 vases can be arranged on a table, depending on its size. No more than 7 vases should be set out on one table, or it will not be possible to tell the eyes from the eyebrows, and the arrangement will look just like the cheap chrysanthemum screens sold in the markets. The stands should be from 3 to 4 inches to 2 feet 5 inches or 6 inches tall. They should be different in height, but should be in proportion to one another so that there is an attractive relationship between the appearance of them all. If there is a tall stand in the center with 2 low ones on the sides, or if the ones at the back are tall and the ones in the front are low, or if they are set out in pairs, they will look like what people call a beautiful pile of trash. Whether the flowers should be dense or spread out, whether they should lean towards the viewer or away, all depends on the sense of pictorial composition of someone who knows how to appreciate them. Pardon me for a second. While preparing flower pots, one can make a glue by mixing pitch, resin, elm bark, flour, and oil. and heating the mixture in glowing ashes of rice stalks. Push pins up through a copper disc and then heat the glue and stick the disc to the inside of the pot. After the glue has cooled, tie up a bunch of flowers with thin wire and push them down to the pins. They should be at an angle to look best, and they should not be right in the middle of the pot. The branches should be separated. The leaves should stand out clearly, and the flowers themselves must not be crowded together. Afterwards, add water to the pot and use a little sand to cover up the copper disc. The arrangement will only be correct if it looks as if the flowers have been grown in the pot. To prune flowers picked from trees and fruits for display in a vase, for one cannot pick all the flowers oneself, and those picked by others will always be unsatisfactory. First hold them in your hand and turn them this way and that to see how they look best. After deciding that, prune off the extra branches to make an attractive arrangement that is spare and uncommon. Then consider how the stems will curve when put into the vase so that you can avoid having all the leaves at the back of the arrangement or all the flowers at the sides. If you just take away any branches that comes to hand and cut a straight stem from it to put it into the vase, it will look stiff and out of place. The blooms will face sideways and the leaves will turn backwards so that the whole will be unattractive and inharmonious as well. This is how to make a curve in a straight stem. Saw halfway through it. Insert a small piece of brick or stone into the cut and the stem will bend. If the stem then tends to fall over, use 1 or 2 pins to strengthen it. Even maple leaves and bamboo branches, bits of grass and thistles can all be used in decorative arrangements. A single green bamboo twig, if complemented by a few aspen seeds, some leaves of fine grass, and 2 thistle branches, all of them in proper arrangement, can have an unworldly beauty. When flowers and trees are planted for the first time, it does not matter if they are set in an angle. Let the leaves face where they will, for after a year, they and the branches will straighten up by themselves. In fact, if a tree is planted straight up, it will be difficult for it to grow in a striking shape. In raising potted trees, first select those which have roots that are exposed and crooked like chicken's feet. Cut off about the first 3 branches, then let the others grow. Each branch should have a section of the trunk to itself, with from 7 to 9 branches to the top of the tree. There should not be 2 branches opposite one another like shoulders, nor should the joints be swollen like the knees of a crane. The branches should grow out in all directions, not only to the right and left, or to the front and back, otherwise the tree will look bare. Some trees are called double-trunked or triple-trunked. This is when 2 or 3 trees grow from the same roots. If the roots of a tree do not look like chicken's feet, the tree will look unattractive, as if it has been just struck in the dirt. The proper training of a tree takes at least 30 or 40 years. In my lifetime, I have seen only one man who managed to raise several trees properly, old Wan Sai Chang of my home country. Once at a home in Yangchu, I saw a potted box and a potted cypress that had been presented by a visitor from Yushan, but this was at the home of a merchant, and their being in such a place was as pitiful as brilliant pearls being thrown into the darkness. Other than these, the trees I have seen have not been particularly good. If the branches are allowed to grow out so that the tree looks like a pagoda, or if they twist around like earthworms, the tree will look as if it had been trained by a common gardener. While adding some detail in the pot, the flowers or stones try to create small scenes as lovely pictures or grand vistas of enchantment. These can be the delight of your study if you can lose yourself in contemplation of them while sitting with a cup of fine tea. Once, when planting Narcisse, I had no stones from Ligpe to put in the pot, so instead I used some small pieces of coal that looked like stones. If one takes 5 or 7 cabbage sprouts, as white as jade and of various sizes, plants them in sand in a rectangular pot, and then covers the sand with small pieces of coal instead of stones, the black coal will contrast with the white cabbage and look most interesting. Thinking up possibilities like this can provide endless enjoyment, more than I can describe. If one puts some calamus seeds in the mouth, chews them along with a cold rice broth, and blows the mixture on to bits of charcoal, which are then put in dark and damp place, a very fine calamus will grow on them. The bits of charcoal can then be moved to a pot or a bowl wherever one wants, and will look like stones covered with luxuriant moss. Old lotus seeds can be ground off on each end and put into an eggshell, which can then be put with a chicken's other eggs and taken out when they hatch. Plant the seeds in a small pot using the mud from an old swallow's nest into which asparagus has been ground until it forms 20% of the mixture. Water them with river water and let them get the light of the morning sun. When the flowers bloom, they will be the size of a wine cup, and the leaves will have shrunk to the size of a bowl, a beautiful and charming effect. In laying our gardens, pavilions, wandering paths, small mountains of stone, and flower paintings, try to give the feeling of the small in the large, and the large in the small, of the real in the illusion, and of the illusion in the reality. Some things should be hidden, and some should be obvious, some prominent, and some vague. Arranging a proper garden is not just a matter of setting out winding paths in a broad area with many rocks, thinking that it is will only waste time and energy. To make a miniature mountain pile up some dirt, then place stones on it and plant flowers and grass here and there. The fence in the front of it should be of plum trees, and the wall behind it should be covered with vines, so that it will look just like a mountain, even though there is no mountains there. There is a way of showing the small and the large. In an unused corner, plant some bamboo, which will quickly grow tall. Then plant some luxuriant plum trees in front to screen it. This is the way to show the large in the small. The wall of a small garden should be winding and covered with green vines, and large stones decorated with inscriptions can be set into it. Then one will be able to open a window and will, while looking at a stone wall, feel as if one were gazing out across endless precipices. Here is a way to show the real amidst an illusion. Arrange the garden so that when a guest feels he has seen everything, he can suddenly take a turn in the path and have a broad new vista open up before him, or open a simple door in a pavilion only to find it leads to an entirely new garden. There are several ways of creating an illusion amidst reality. Make a gateway into a closed yard, and then cover it over with bamboo and stones, the yard beyond with real, while real will look then like an illusion. Or on top of a wall, build a low railing. It will look like an upper balcony, creating an illusion from reality. Poor scholars who live in small crowded houses should rearrange their rooms in imitation of the sterns of the Taiping boats of my home country, the steps of which can be made into 3 beds by extending them at the front and back. Each bed is then separated from its neighbor by a board covering with paper. Looking at them when they are laid out is like walking along road. You do not have a confined feeling at all. When Yoon and I were living in Yangchu, we arranged our house in this fashion. Though the house had only two spans, we divided it into two bedrooms, a kitchen and a living room, and we still had plenty of space left over. Yoon had laughed about our handiwork, saying, "The layout is fine, but it still does not have the feel of a rich home." I had to admit she was right. Once, while I was sweeping the family graves in the mountains, I came across some pretty patterned stones, which I took home and talked over with Yoon. If you use putty to set sanchu pebbles into a white stone pot, I said, it looks attractive because the stones, and the pot are all the same color. These yellow stones are lovely, but if I use the unusual white putty on them, it will contrast with the yellow of the stones and make the chisel marks on them stand out. What can I do about that? Take the poorer stones, said Yoon, and pound them into dust. Mix the dust with the putty and use it to fill in the chisel marks while it is still wet. When it dries, perhaps the colors will be the same. We did as she suggested and built up a miniature mountain in a rectangular pot from the kilns at Yixing. The mountain was on the left, while another small mound on the right, along the mountain. We made horizontal patterns similar to those on the mountains in paintings by Yen Lin. The cliffs were irregular, like those along a riverbank. We filled an empty corner of the pot with river mud and planted duckweed, white with many petals, on the top of the stones. We planted morning glories, which are usually called cloud pines. It all took us several days to complete. By the deep autumn, the morning glories had grown all over the mountain, covering it like wistaria hanging from a rock face, and when their flowers bloomed, they were deep red. The white duckweed also bloomed, and letting one's spirit wander along the red and the white was like a visit to Ping Island. We put the pot out under the eaves and discussed it in great detail. Here we should build a pavilion on the water. There a thatched arbor. Here we should inscribe a stone with the characters, where flowers drop and waters flow. We could live here. We could fish there. From this other place, we could gaze off into the distance. We were as excited about it as if we were actually going to move to those imaginary hills and vales. But one night, some miserable cats fighting over something to eat fell from the eaves, smashing the pot in an instant. Pardon me. I signed and said, even this little project has incurred the jealousy of heaven. Neither of us could keep from shedding tears. Burning incense in a quiet room is one of the refined pleasures of leisure. Yoon used to take garu wood and other fragrant things and steam them in a rice cauldron. Then we would burn them slowly on a brass stand about half an inch above a fire. The scent was subtle and lovely, and there was no smoke. Buddha's hands should not be smelled by someone who is drunk, or they will spoil. Quinces should not be allowed to sweat. If they do, they should be washed with water. Only the Hisang Yang does not need special treatment. There are also ways of arranging Buddha's hands and quinces as decorations, but I cannot write out the details of these. Often people will thoughtlessly pick up and smell something fragrant. That is part of an arrangement, and then just as thoughtlessly put it back. These are people who do not understand decoration. When living at home, I always had a vase of flowers on my desk. Once Yoon said to me, no matter what the weather, you can always manage to put together beautiful flower arrangements. Now in painting, there is a school that specializes in insects on grasses. Why don't you try your hand at that? There is no way to control the wandering of insects. How can I study them? I answered. There is a way, but I'm afraid it seems almost criminal to me, said Yoon. Try telling me. When an insect dies, its colors do not change, Yoon said. You could find an insect like a praying mantis, a cicada, or a butterfly and kill it by sticking it with a pin. Then use a fine wire to tie its neck to a flower or a blade of grass, arranging its feet to grasp the stem or stand on a leaf. It will look just as if it were alive. Wouldn't that work? I was delighted and did as she suggested. No one who saw these insects failed to praise them. It is hard to find such clever women these days. While Yoon and I were staying with the host at Sishin, Madame Hua had her two daughters learn characters from Yoon. As they studied the summer, sun beat down with a fierce glare in the courtyard of their country home. So Yoon showed them how to make movable screens out of live flowers. Each of these screens had a base made by taking two thin sticks of wood, 4 or 5 inches long, and joining them with 4 cross pieces, each about a foot long, making a flat platform, like the top of a low stool. Then she drilled round holes at each corner of this and stood a lattice of bamboo in them. In the middle, she put a pot filled with sand and planted with hyacinth beans, the vines of which would climb up the bamboo lattice. The screens were about 6 or 7 feet tall, but 2 people could easily move one of them. They can be put anywhere you like, filling the windows with green shade and blocking the sun while letting the breeze through. If you make several, they can be set up out in winding patterns that can be rearranged as you like. Thus, they are called movable flower screens. Any climbing vines or fragrant plants can be used to make them, and they render life in the countryside more pleasant. My friend Lu Fan Fang, whose courtesy name was Chang and whose literary name was Chun Shan, was a talented painter of pine and cypress trees, and the plum flowers and chrysanthemums. He could also write in the Li script and inscribe chops. We once lived at his home, the Villa of Serenity. For a year and a half, the building we stayed in faced east and was of 5 spans, of which we occupied 3. From our rooms, we could gaze into the far distance, regardless of whether it was light or dark, windy or rainy. In the yard, there was a cassia tree with a lovely clear fragrance, and the building itself had a hallway with side rooms, all very quiet. When we moved there, we took a servant couple with us, and they brought along their little daughter. The man could make clothes, and the woman could spin cotton, so to provide for our needs. Yoon did embroidery, and the servant woman spun while her husband sewed. I have always enjoyed entertaining, and for that we needed to buy a little wine for drinking games. Yoon, fortunately, was good at making a meal without spending much money. Melons, vegetables, fish, and shrimps, when passed through Yoon's hands, would take on a delicious taste. My friends knew I was poor, and they would often contribute some money for wine so that we could talk the day away. For my part, I kept the place spotless and neither dominated the conversation nor objected to a casual atmosphere. Among my friends were Yang Pu Fan, whose courtesy name was Chang Su, and who was a talented portrait painter. Yan Xiao Yu, whose courtesy name was Phi, and who was adept at painting mountains and rivers, and Wang Xing Lan, whose courtesy name was Yin, and who did skillful paintings of flowers and birds. They all liked the refined atmosphere at the Villa of Serenity. So they would paint characters and carve chops, sell them, and give Yoon the money so she could prepare tea and wine for our guests. We would spend the whole day doing nothing but criticizing poetry and talking about painting. There were also gentlemen, Xia Tan and his brother Yi Shan, Mao Shanyi and his brother Chi Fai, and Chang Yun Sang, Li Chu Sang, Chao Sao Se, Ko Sao Yu, Hua Sin Fan, and Chang He Sin Han. They were like swallows on the rafters, coming and going as they pleased. Yun even sold her hairpins to buy wine without a second thought, because we did not want to give up lightly such a beautiful time and place. But now we are all parted like clouds blown by the wind. The jade is broken, the incense burned. I cannot hear to look back. 4 things were forbidden at the Villa of Serenity: talking about official promotions, official business, or the 8-legged official examinations, and playing cards or dice. Offenders were fined 5 caddies of wine. 4 things were encouraged: generosity, romantic refinement, an unrestrained atmosphere, and peace and quiet. With nothing to do in a long summer, we held examination parties. There would be 8 people at each party, and each would bring 200 copper cash. We would draw lots, and the winner would become the examination master, sitting apart and being in charge of the proceedings. The second would be the official recorder, and also sat separately. Everyone else became an examination candidate and drew a sheet of paper from the recorder, all properly stamped with a seal. The examination master would announce 2 lines of poetry, and 1 of the 5 characters, and 1 of the 7 characters, and the candidates would then have the time it took a stick of incense to burn in which to write lines rhyming with them. They could walk or stand while thinking, but no one was allowed to talk or exchange ideas. When they had finished their couplets, they put them into a box and were then allowed to sit down. To prevent favoritism, everyone had handed in his paper. The recorder opened the box and copied the papers into a book, which he then gave to the examination master. From the 16 couplets, the best 3 of 7 character lines and the best 3 of 5 character lines would be chosen. The writer of the couplet selected as the best of these 6 became the next examination master, and whoever was placed second would be the next recorder. Those who failed to have either their couplets chosen would be fined 20 cash, and anyone who had not more than 1 chosen would be fined 10. If someone went beyond the time limit, he was fined 40. The examination master for each round got 100 cash and cents money. So by playing 10 rounds a day, we would accumulate 1,000 cash, enough for plenty of wine. Only Yoon's was considered an official paper, and she was allowed to sit while thinking out her answers. One day, Yang Pu Fan did a sketch of Yoon and me in the garden. It looked just like us. That night, the moonlight was very beautiful, and the shadows the orchids sketched on the whitewashed wall were especially lovely. Sing Lan was drunk and merely announced, "Pu Fan can sketch your portrait, but I can paint the flower shadows. But can you paint them as well as we were sketched?" I asked laughingly. Sing Lan then took a sheet of blank paper, put it up on the wall and painted in the shadows with heavy and light ink, depending on whether they were dark or light, as they were cast on the paper. We took it down and looked at it in the daylight, and while it could not be considered a true painting, he had captured the natural serenity of the leaves in the moonlight. Yoon treasured it, and we all wrote inscriptions on it. There were two places in Socho called the South Garden and the North Garden. We wanted to go there once when the rape flowers were in bloom, but unfortunately there were no wine houses nearby where we could find something to drink. We could have taken a basket of things with us, but then we would have to toast the flowers in cold wine, and that would have been no fun at all. We talked about looking for a drinking place nearby, and about first looking at the flowers and then coming home to drink, but neither sounded as much fun as toasting the flowers with warm wine. We had not made up our minds what to do when Yoon laughed. Tomorrow all of you give me some wine money and I'll bring a small stove myself. Everyone laughed and agreed. After they left, I asked Yoon, are you really going to bring a stove yourself? No, she said, but in the market I've seen dumpling sellers who carry with them a pan, a small stove, and everything else we might need. Why not hire one of them to go with us? I can cook the food beforehand, and we can warm things up when we get there. That sounds fine for the wine and for the food, I said, but what are you going to do for a teapot? We can take along an earthenware pot, said Yoon. Hang it right over the little stove with an iron hook, and add some more fuel to heat the tea. Wouldn't that work? I clapped my hands in approval. There was a dumpling seller named Pao on the street corner, and I offered him 100 cash to bring his things with us the next afternoon. He happily agreed. The next day, when all those who were going with us to look at the flowers had arrived, I told them what we had done, and they all sighed with admiration. After lunch, we went off to the South Garden, carrying cushions and mats with us. We picked a place in the shade of a willow tree and sat down. First we made tea, and when we had finished it, we warmed the wine and cooked the food. The wind and the sun were exquisite. The earth was golden, and the blue clothes and the red sleeves of strollers filled the paths between the fields, while butterflies and bees flew all around us. The scene was so intoxicating, one hardly needed to drink. After a while, the wine and food were ready, and everyone sat down on the ground to feast. The man who had helped us out was not an ordinary sort, so we persuaded him to come and join us in our drinking. The strollers who saw us all envied our clever idea. By the end of the afternoon, cups and plates were scattered around, and all of us were very jolly, some sitting and some lying down, some singing and some whistling. As the red sun set, I felt like eating some rice porridge, so our helper quickly brought some rice and cooked it, and we all went home well satisfied. Did y'all all enjoy today's trip? Asked Yoon. Without your help, it wouldn't have been nearly so much fun, they replied. Laughing and joking, we parted. Poor scholars should be frugal, but still refined and clean, and so fat, as their home, clothing, and food are concerned. I define frugility as knowing when to save money. For example, at meals, I like a little to drink, but do not enjoy a great many dishes. So Yoon once made a plum flower tray by taking 6 white porcelain saucers 2 inches across and putting one in the middle and the 5 others around the outside, so that when I set together, they looked like a plum flower. Then she painted gray, and then she made a cover for the tray that was rounded with a handle. On the top shape, like a flower stem, when placed on the table, it looked as if a plum flower had been put there, and the food seemed to have been set down on its petals. One tray with 6 different dishes was enough for a leisurely meal with 2 or 3 close friends. If we ate everything, we would just refill the tray. Yoon also made a round tray with a low edge on which she could conveniently put things like cups, chopsticks, and wine pots, making it easy to carry them around and set them down wherever she liked. These are all examples of frugility in eating. Yoon also made all my caps, collars, and socks. If clothes develop holes, they could be patched by using pieces of the same garment. They should look neat and clean. Clothes should be dark in color so that dirty spots will not show. Then they can be worn either to go out or around the house. These are examples of fragility in clothing. When we first moved to the Villa of Serenity, we felt our rooms were too dark, so we pasted white paper on the walls to brighten them up. During the summer months, we took out the downstairs windows, but there were no screens, and we felt the place was too open and lacking in privacy. There were old bamboo curtains, said Yoon. Why don't we just use them in place of screens? How? I asked. We could take several lengths of bamboo and paint them black, she said, and make a framework out of them that fills the top of the window while leaving the lower half of it empty. Then cut one of the bamboo curtains in half and hang it from the framework so that it reaches down as far as the tabletop. 4 sharp pieces of bamboo can be tied up vertically in an empty space. And finally, we can cover the cross piece from which the bamboo curtain is hung by widening strips of black cloth around it and sewing them together. It will give us privacy, be attractive, and not cost anything. There's another example of what I mean by knowing when to save money. One should apply this rule in everything. The saying of the ancients, even ends of bamboo and sawdust have their uses, is very true. When the lotus flowers bloom in the summer, they close up at night, but open again in the morning. Yoon used to put a few tea leaves in a gauze bag and put inside a lotus flower before it closed in the evening. The next morning she would take out the tea and boil it with natural spring water. It had a wonderful and unique fragrance. All right, so I'll tell you a little bit about the book. I appreciate y'all popping on. This book is called Shin Fu, 6 Records of a Floating Life. And my daughter said this was a good book to read. We read the introduction in chapter 1, half of chapter 1 yesterday before I fell asleep reading 10 times. But I'll just read the back of the book. I touched Yoon's old clothes and smelled the fragrance of her that still lingered in them. 6 Records of a Floating Life, 1809, is an extraordinary blend of autobiography, love story, and social document, written by a man who was educated as a scholar but earned his living as a civil servant and art dealer. In this intimate memoir, Shin Fu recounts the domestic and romantic joys of his marriage to Yoon, the beautiful and artistic girl he fell in love with as a child. He also described other incidents of his life, including how his beloved wife obtained a courtesan for him, and reflects on his travels through China. Shin Fu's exquisite memoir shows 6 parallels, layers of one man's life, loves, and career, with revealing glimpses into Chinese society of the Qing dynasty. This lyrical translation conveys all the descriptive immediacy of the original. The introduction describes the ways in which the book offers a unique insight into family life, government, and the powerful role of the courtesan in the 19th century China. This edition also includes a chronology, maps, and notes. So, this particular book, it's not a book that I've read before, and I do not practice reading before I read. So I just want to say that I don't practice reading. I just start reading. So tomorrow we will read part 3, The Sorrows of Misfortune. So I want to say thank you for joining. This is just something that I've been wanting to do for over a year on my channel, and I'm happy to be able to do it. I also am very thankful that we can have this nice little setup. We have the candlelight so I could see the print. We also have the big candle in the back. You can see the glow on the wall. We have some artwork up here as well. And I have a teacup. I have some matches to light the candle, of course. And I have you, the viewer. So I want to say thank you for joining in. Thank you for watching this live literary reading. And we're going to get through it together. So I appreciate your support. And I'm going to bid you good morning. It is 1:21 a.m. Central Standard Time Zone. And I appreciate this episode of live literary reading. So we're going to sign out. Let me use the cup. Thanks again.